Welcome to the Design podcast from the Methodist Church, Conversations on Living Life to the Full. In this latest edition, I'm joined by Michael King, who is a Methodist local preacher and formerly the team leader for the World Church Relationships team at Methodist Church House. And he's also Vice President Designate of the Methodist Conference, and he's due to take up that post in July 2012. Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, Michael, can you explain first, let's talk about the context that we're talking about discipleship in here. Can you explain what your role with World Church Relationship was and what that team did and how it kind of exercised the mission of the church?
Yes, I was leader of World Church Relationships for the last few years, and before that, team leader in the World Church office. And throughout all of that time, it was really working with partner churches around the world. We've got about 65 national partner churches that we work with on behalf of the Methodist Church in Britain. And I saw it as my role, really, to develop the relationships and to develop the amount of learning that we had with one another over that time. So to build up the idea of more reciprocity, mutuality in mission, recognising the fact that yes, we send people and we send resources, but also resources and personnel come this way too now. And it's just over that decade, really, of just recognising the changing scene. And the big thing for me in that decade was to ensure that all the partner churches that we had were indeed autonomous. Gambia was the last one that went to become autonomous, not independent. That's the wrong word for it, but autonomous, and that was an important time for me, and I think an important chapter to close for the British Methodist Church, that we no longer had an overseas district anymore. All the partners we had were autonomous, albeit interdependent churches worldwide.
And there's something quite Methodist, actually, about the interdependency of the partner churches. It's kind of the connection on a very wide level.
Absolutely. I think the idea that the connection is, sometimes seen at very local level, isn't it? But also district, national, but also international level. And when you go to bodies like the World Methodist Council, you appreciate just how interconnected we all are.
And yet we're also... The partner churches are very, very different, very diverse. You've got Pakistan, the Gambia, Fiji, Sri Lanka, everywhere. How do you maintain a kind of single or a core understanding of what it means to be a disciple of Christ when you've got so many cultures, so many different interpretations of the gospel? It must affect the way you think about what it means to be a disciple.
Yes, it does, and it's challenging. It's hard work. But I think if one can understand the context as being this is about God's world, it's God's mission. It's not the British Church's mission. It's not an individual's mission. It's trying to sort of key into actually how God sees the world, and therefore how God sees mission in God's world. If you can get that understanding right, then I think other things fall into place, because they're part of this jigsaw, really. And so each relationship that a church like the British Church has with another partner church, it is, but almost by definition, very different. But it's also part of this whole wonderfully complex, rich, varied picture that is God's mission.
And you've kind of made yourself a hostage fortune by saying it's about how God sees the world and how God sees mission. I'm going to ask you to imagine, without getting too above your station, what you think God does see mission as, how God would see the world and how God would see mission, and how God is calling us to be people of mission. Because the word mission, of course, has huge amounts of baggage. We talk about missionaries and, going to preach to the heathens, to bash them with their Bibles. What do you think mission means in today's context?
Well, in today's context, or any context, I think, I see it as movement. That God's mission, some people sort of say, creation, that was it, and the rest. Well, yes, of course, I believe that God created the world. But then there's also, as you look at the whole story that develops in the Bible, it's about redeeming people, it's about restoring people, it's about transforming people. And that's an ongoing task. Whether there's a start and an actual finish point, I'm not sure. What I do know is that actually I see that creative energy, that redeeming, restoring, transforming energy happening all around me. And it's that actually I think the church and individuals need to key into.
And how do we then participate in that movement of God? How do we kind of get on board with God's purposes, do you think? I mean, I suppose there must be lots of ways, but how have you seen it happen?
Well, I've seen it by people actually wanting to take risks and get involved, and see where need is and discern where need is, and then going for it.
Just get involved.
Get involved. I think there's any other way, is there? I think we're called to get our hands dirty. Yeah.
When I've been talking to people about throughout these podcasts about what it means to be a disciple, they often come back to that phrase. It's kind of dirty nails, dirty fingernails discipleship, getting involved in God's purposes. But to get involved in God's purposes, you've got to know what God's purposes are and what the kind of pattern God's calling us to is. Do you think Jesus set a particular pattern for us to work with? How helpful are the Gospels in figuring this out?
Well, I don't think there's any one way. I think there are a number of stories which give us a clue as to how Jesus would want us to behave in any situation. And for me, the most meaningful of those stories is undoubtedly the Emmaus Road story, which has meant an awful lot to me in my discipleship over the years, and still does. And I still see new and exciting things in it. And I think it's got a lot to offer to us, especially when the work that I do at the moment with mission partners, for instance. It's vital that people actually understand this process, I think, that Jesus goes through with those disciples on the Emmaus Road. I just think, engage with that, and there's a lot of clues there as to how Jesus would behave.
I'm going to ask you to expand on that. What are the kind of processes that because it's a very short story,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
It's quite difficult to know what to take away from it. These two disciples on the road, it's all gone wrong.
Yeah.
The Saviour wasn't their Saviour, or not evidently, he's dead.
Yeah.
And then Jesus turns up, but they don't know it's him. So I have to say I'm slightly confused. As they must have been.
Exactly. I think they were. And Jesus must have known that. But the important thing is in that story, for me, one of the important things, is that he doesn't assume that. He must have known it, and yet in the conversation that he has with them, he doesn't assume anything. Because he asks the question, doesn't he? Right at the beginning of that story, he asks, what are you discussing together? Well, was it obvious? He just wanted to hear where they were at that time and what their understanding was at that time, rather than coming into a new situation and presuming that even the words they're using are words that he totally understood. It's so important, I think, when we meet people, we really try to understand what they're saying and where they're coming from, what their context is.
And of course, that's one of the things that causes people to have baggage with the old pattern of sending missionaries. This idea that actually missionaries just assumed that they knew the gospel and that all these people overseas needed was to hear that gospel and everything would be okay. I mean, how are you seeing the pattern of, we don't call them missionaries anymore, mission partners, develop in new ways? And what is the value now of sending mission partners overseas?
Well, the huge value of mission partners is in that word partnership. It is about getting alongside the church and the people where they are, and that starts from the position of need. Where is the need? Let's get alongside. Now, our partners are asking us for skills, experience, expertise, and rightly so. But for us, and I think this has been true for many, many years, it's also about if we're going to put somebody into that situation, then attitudes need to be right too. It's so important that people go with the right values and attitudes, and that they're willing to get alongside other people, rather than this idea that, I know I know what's good for you, and I've got the answers. No, we're not. We shouldn't be there. We might come with experience, we might come with expertise, but actually let's just listen first, and then join in with the conversation, which is what happens on the Emmaus Road. They tell the story to Jesus. Jesus then hears that. Then he comes in and says, okay, I've heard that. Now let me just move us along here. Let me just put that into another kind of context, into a God context. And he talks, doesn't he, about the whole Israel history in a couple of verses, about the Moses and then the prophets. And he begins to say, look, that bit of the story is in this whole part of the story. And that's what we ought to be doing if we're involved in evangelism of any kind, is we're making sense of the small bits of people's lives into a much bigger context.
And if you were to describe that Jesus who patterns this for us in a short sentence, how would you describe the Jesus that you think we should be following today?
I think it's a Jesus that meets us and wants to meet us where we are, and then take us on through a journey of that sort of understanding of redemption, of being restored and then transformed. And that's where I'm aiming for, really. I think in what I'm saying to anybody about this work is, we're about transforming people to give them the fullness of life.
But of course, we're not, as the Methodist Church in Britain, we are not the perfect Christians, as much as we would love to be, and as much as we hope to strive to holiness and to be really good disciples. We haven't got it all figured out. So surely there must be some kind of counterbalance to that transformational process whereby we are transformed by our partners overseas. Otherwise it can't be a true partnership, surely.
And I said right at the beginning, I mean, part of what I've seen to be my role over the last decade has been to enable that learning. I mean, we obviously have things to offer to other people, don't get me wrong, in the right way. But equally, people have got things to teach us. And for me, the church here will grow, and only grow, if we're willing to learn from others. That doesn't mean to say we've got to take everything on board that everybody has to say. And sometimes we latch on to the fact that some churches are growing, hugely in other parts of the world, and they must know all the answers. It's a different context. But let's hear what we can from other churches, what we can learn from them, and then how certain aspects of that we can use in our context for the church to grow.
Can you give me any examples of things you feel we've really learnt from partners overseas?
I think confidence is one thing. And I think we're beginning to learn it ourselves now. But in some churches overseas are much more confident.
Confident as in their Christian identity or in evangelism?
More in evangelism. That they feel they have something to offer, and not in an arrogant way, I hope. But I think some of our partners and some of the people who are here now amongst us, who are very much part of Methodist Church Britain, are much more confident in talking about the gospel, gossiping the gospel, just chatting to their neighbours about things in a much more natural way than perhaps we have been in the past.
Mm. And the world, the context is changing, although we're talking about a global context. The world is shrinking in a sense with the way that technology has allowed us to network with people so much more quickly than ever before, and to receive news from nations overseas very, very quickly. What do you think the biggest challenge is for the church in that context, in terms of continuing to be a good partner? You're absolutely right in terms of the speed at which information is coming back to us. I mean, I think we have responsibility, therefore, to keep our prayers relevant. And there's no reason why we shouldn't. And indeed,
I hear in most churches that I go to, intercessions are pretty much up to date, actually. That people are very much aware of the world context. And I'm delighted by that. I think there are ways in which we could use it much more in terms of things like Skype and sort of getting much more first-hand contact with people and hearing worship and being involved in each other's worship in a much more real and realistic way. I think there are ways in which we can learn about that.
And we often speak about how in Britain, certainly, church membership seems to be falling. Christianity is less culturally accepted, perhaps, than it was 20, 30 years ago. But worldwide, does the picture give you hope?
Yes. I'm not unhopeful about this country either, actually, because I even here, in many parts of this country, that I see that confidence coming back, and I do see a proper sense of hopefulness. But we've got to change. And in other parts of the world, that's true as well. That the gospel has been, where it's been properly put into a local culture. You do see examples of great growth around the world. And that is one of the geniuses, really, of Christianity, isn't it? Really? That it is able to adapt and adopt and move. And where people are willing to understand that history moves on, that the world moves on, that their contexts are changing, and we learn to adapt, then, there's always going to be great hope. But we've got to keep this idea that the object of the exercise is always outside the church, that the mission of the church is always outside it, that we're always about transforming people in need who are not actually in the church at the moment.
Wonderful. Well, I'm afraid we are out of time. If you're listening and you want to track down some more of the Design podcasts, you can visit www.methodist.org.uk/design. I'll put my teeth in a minute. That's DSIGN. And if you want to reflect on the issues further for yourself or with others in a group, you might like to make use of the Design postcards, and you can find out more about them on the website too. Michael, thank you so much for your time, and wish you well in your year of office with the Methodist Conference.
Thank you very much.